everyone, and welcome to a very special 100th episode of the Rumcast. Woo! We need like a little applause. Like
we did it, 100.
Yes,
yeah,
we're
like
here.
The air horns, the fireworks, all of the
not the annoying air horns though. I don't want the pew pew. None of that.
We do need the annoying ones.
No, gosh.
Every type, kazoos, everything.
No way. My name is John Gulla. Co-hosting here with me is none other than the infamous Will Hookinga. And this is the 100th time, Will, that together we are fortunate enough to be talking about all things rum with the people who love and shape it. And in celebration of this milestone, Will, we did things a bit differently and spoke to quite a few different people this time.
Yeah, this is actually going to be quite a departure from our usual type of episode. You know, I think the most people we've ever interviewed for an episode, maybe we've had 3 people on one episode before.
Yeah.
But usually they're interviewed together. And what we did this time, we interviewed not 1, not 2, not 3, but 12 people. Woo. And all previous Rumcast guests. We wanted to go back through all the people we've had over these 100 episodes and bring on a bunch of different types of people in different roles across the rum industry. And some are even not in the industry, but commentators. And really just not only look back at rum as a whole since, 2019 or so, which is when we started the podcast, but also looking at the present, how rum has changed, and also looking ahead at the next 4 or 5 years of rum and what they think rum enthusiasts will have to look out for over the next few years. So I'm going to quickly run through the cast of characters that we assembled for this 100th episode. So I'm just
Does it count as a cadre? Is it a cadre?
I think it could be.
Point?
Yeah. I don't know.
A squadron.
Yeah, I don't know what the term is for when you get 12, a group of 12 or more rum people together. Geese have a gaggle, so we need to come up with something for rum people. But our 12 for this episode, we have Kate Perry of La Maison and Velier, Zan Kong from Worthy Park, Eric Kaye of Holmes Key, Ian Burrell, the Global Rum Ambassador and Equiano co-founder, Margaret Monplaisir of St. Lucia Distillers and the new WIRSPA chairperson, Lance Suresbali from thelonecanner.com, Jeff Beachbum Berry, the legendary author and owner of Latitude 29 in New Orleans, Craig Nicholson of Worthy Park, Ed Hamilton of Hamilton Rum, Carsten Vlierboom of E&A Scheer, Steve McGarry of the new Sydney Rum Distillery, and Maggie Campbell from Mount Gay. Whew, I gotta take a breath. That's a long list, John.
That sounded like they were like Oscar nominees.
There's actually more people on this episode than there are Best Picture nominees, if you can believe that. So
that's right.
We have distillers, we have blenders, bottlers, market managers, brand founders, CEOs, writers, a bar owner, a lot of different types of people looking at the rum industry, the rum category from different perspectives.
Yeah.
And so like I said, we haven't done something like this before. Usually we just publish whole conversations. If we published 100% of each of these interviews, the episode would be like 4 hours long, probably. So
yeah, maybe more.
We didn't set out with that in mind as our goal. What we wanted to do was have all these conversations and then, pick out the nuggets from them and assemble them together, not to try to create a narrative that isn't there, but just to sort of find connections, find what stands out to all these people, what are the commonalities, the themes, and organize an episode around that. So that's exactly what we've done, and I hope people like it. I guess it's a little risky to our 100th episode just be like, hey, let's do something we've never done before, and it's completely different and a lot more
the
work.
Window. Yeah, we'll just do something completely different and see how it goes. I'm excited for people to hear it. I do think there's a lot of value in pulling the themes out of that period of time, like you mentioned, and I think that's where it went. So it's a big task to do it this way, but I think we got a good product that captures that in the end. But before we keep going with it, I did want to ask you, Will, in recognition of this, did you do anything yourself to mark the occasion?
I am waiting until we're 100% done with this. Like I was just saying, this, the idea sounded great, and I do think it's very cool, and I'm extremely happy with what we've come up with, but it was a lot more work than we anticipated. So once, it's all done and out the door, that's when I'm going to celebrate. And man, I don't know. I'll have to look through the rums I have and just try to pick something special, I guess. What, do you have something planned?
I already did something. I mean, I'm ahead of you.
Right.
I'm already in celebrate mode. Exactly. So I thought about it a little bit, and back when we started the podcast, I had a definite favorite rum.
Yes.
It was a number one, both in my heart and in my glass, and it's been a while since I had revisited that, at least maybe a year or two, I would think. So I figured, what better time than now to do that? So I broke out my bottle of Foursquare ECS 2005.
Wow.
And I've been, unabashed of my love for this rum throughout the years. And I have about a half bottle of it left at this point. And so I poured myself a glass of that. And my first thoughts were, A, man, this is really good still.
Yeah.
And B, this was the interesting one. It was a bit more bourbon forward than I remembered.
Really?
Yeah. Not badly so, but more than I remembered when I had last tried it. So that led me to a bit of a mission.
Okay.
And I was like, I now want to see, do I have a new favorite rum? Has my favorite rum changed since then? And so I thought the best way that I could quickly do that, because of course I'm not going to try everything, the 400 bottles of rum I have, was to go back and, look at the best of rums of the year that I've picked every year, put them into a flight, and kind of measure it up against it.
This is very exciting.
So yeah, I did that. I poured it neat, and I had the lineup was Holmes Key Belize 2005, which you and I both picked as rum of the year that one year.
Yeah.
In a shock to both of us. Worthy Park, the Gemini Florida Rum Society barrel selection. It's a WPM mark. And Holmes Key Albion was the newest one because I didn't have the one from the year before. It's the only one that I picked as rum of the year I don't have was the Holmes Key Fiji 21 year.
Well, Holmes Key still managed to get 2 representatives.
They did. Yeah. And I still had the Fiji 17 year, which maybe got me fairly close, but I ended up, not using that. So anyways, long story short here. A few things came out of this tasting that I wanted to kind of share with you when I put them next to the ECS 2005. One, back 4 years ago, I definitely had a style of rum that I prized above all the others, and that was Barbados rum.
Yeah.
And now it's much harder for me to have a favorite outright.
Ah, okay. So you're getting more towards my camp where it's too hard to pick a favorite, so I just don't do it. I cop out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm still gonna give you, I think, a result here, but the gap between them was even more lessened. Okay. It was much more difficult going back and forth to pick that. 2 was I noticed I really seemed to gravitate towards a 58% to 61% ABV as being remarkable for a neat pour in my personal enjoyment. Yeah. Which is just me personal, but I found that I was like, as I looked across all of those, that was consistent. And 3, I noticeably missed some sweetness and presence of like cane that I've been getting from some of the unaged and lightly aged rums that we've been enjoying very much lately. All of those, maybe save for the Albion a little bit, seemed just a bit more dry and oak forward.
Well, they're all aged, right?
They are, right? So none of them were unaged or even lightly aged, right?
Yeah.
But I was missing some of that I've been really enjoying lately. So I thought...
The flight felt incomplete, it sounds like. Okay.
Yes. It almost felt like I was wanting an agricole. I was wanting an unaged rum or a lightly aged rum in there to maybe go back and forth between these. So I think it encapsulated some of the journey, if not much of the journey, from 4 or 5 years ago until now. And I still love really well-matured, well-integrated, long-aged rums. But I also am really digging the lighter-aged and more cane distillate forward rums as well now. So, I just think it highlighted the journey. That said, I found it tough for any of them to beat the Foursquare 2005.
The journey was visible, but it was a journey that brought you full circle.
Ooh, I hadn't thought of it that way. If it is full circle, the circle has expanded in diameter.
Oh, okay. So it's not the same little tight circle.
No.
It's grown and expanded, and all these other rum styles are now being absorbed into the circumference of the circle.
Exactly. It might even be an ellipse at this point. Who knows?
Bending. Yeah. Amazing. Well, man, I feel that's actually a really good idea. Is to like every few years do a flight of the rums you've picked for rum of the year. I'll have to go back and see like how many of the ones that I've selected over the years that I still have some. I don't know if I'd be able to do that with very many, but I like the idea. So you
should do it. And I think I want to ask everybody out there maybe to do the same thing, and Put your favorite rum back up on the, if you still have it. A lot of people are like, yep, that was my favorite rum, it's gone. But if you still have your favorite rum around, or one of your favorite rums, put that up and revisit it. Has it changed since you were last there? Put it up against some of the other ones you're enjoying now and see how it goes against that. I'd like to know, what's your favorite current rum, basically.
And honestly, I mean, I think it would be really cool. We did this, I think, with our 50th episode, where people sent in little audio notes to us, and then we ended up putting them in a subsequent episode. So if you have a favorite rum, or if your favorite rum has changed in some way over the years, record just a little voice note or whatever on your phone and email it to us at host@rumcast.com, and we just might end up, if we get enough of them, putting together a little, some kind of fun little package celebrating
a montage,
celebrating the listeners who, I mean, that's the reason why we've been able to end up doing the show for 100 episodes, is because we have awesome listeners, and that's what, keeps us motivated and wanting to do it. I mean, talking to the awesome guests is really cool as well. But yeah, so we would love to hear from you. Send us those at host@rumcast.com, and we'll try to do something fun with them. But John, for now, getting to this episode, in reflecting on this as it's all been coming together, as we've been editing it, I think what is cool about this is I almost see it as kind of a rum time capsule. Like, if someone 20 years from now wants to know what rum enthusiasts or rum producers were thinking about from 2019 to 2024, I feel like they could listen to this episode and get a really good idea of the conversations that were driving the rum world and where people thought the rum world was going to go. So having said that, it's pretty much impossible to try to capture literally everything involving the world of rum. So there's definitely going to be some stuff, that ended up being outside the purview of this episode. And we did try to keep it focused mostly on rum. So we didn't, mostly on rum specifically, as opposed to cocktails, bar culture, and things like that. There's a little bit of that because we did talk to Jeff Barry. But at the end of the day, the show's focus is rum. So we wanted to focus primarily on that. So anyway, I guess, I don't know. Anything else to add, John?
No, I mean, I do think there was some things that were surprises that came out of these that we weren't expecting, that I think people are going to be interested to hear about. So
for sure,
listen in for some of those little nuggets that I think, noteworthy, newsworthy even, maybe.
There are some newsworthy things. Yeah. Some news breaking, some release breaking that's in there. So there's some fun little surprises along the way. But we'll take a quick break to hear from the sponsor of this episode, and then we'll get right over to this very non-traditional 100th episode. Hey Rumcasters, if you've listened to the show for a while now, there's one rum website you've probably heard us reference more than any other, rumwonk.com, Matt Petrick's website full of deep dives into the many corners of the rum world. Well, recently, Matt and co-author Carrie Smith went beyond the website and published their most definitive deep dive to date, Modern Caribbean Rum, a hardcover 850-page book that takes you inside 75 distilleries in 20 Caribbean rum-making regions and much more. And now, through February 11th, you can get 10% off by going to wonkpress.com, that's WONK press.com, and using promo code RUMCAST. Plus, Matt and Carrie will sign your copy at no additional cost. So go to wonkpress.com and use promo code RUMCAST when you purchase a copy of Modern Caribbean Rum by February 11th. If you're craving a deeper understanding of the world of Caribbean rum, you'd have a tough time finding a better place to start. Modern Caribbean Rum looks at the region's rum from every angle, including its history, classifications, the business of rum, every step of production from the cane fields to the aging warehouses, and much more. Along the way, the book is full of 900 photographs and images that really bring the subject to life. So again, you can get 10% off your copy by using promo code RUMCAST at wonkpress.com through February 11th, and it will be signed at no additional cost. Go to wonkpress.com now to grab the deal. Now back to the show. As we said in the intro, our goal with this episode is to capture a snapshot of the rum world and look ahead at what's coming next. But before we start thinking about the future, let's consider where we are right now and how much has changed since 2019 when we started working on the Rumcast. Think back to that time. What were on your local store shelves? What bottles were in your cabinet? How much has that changed since then? To set the scene for us, it only feels natural to turn to the very first guest we ever interviewed for the show, and one who has played a big role in bringing more rums to our own backyard, the United States. Here's Kaye, the founder of American independent bottler Holmes.
Really, there was nobody doing cast strength single barrel rums back then. There were no independent bottlers, really. Hamden was just getting started. It was a very different world 5 years ago. And now we're in the golden age. There's never been more rum available, at least to Americans. The Europeans have always been spoiled for choice. But in the last 5 years, I mean, the rise of not only that, but that has also spurred on the original producers to come up with cool of their own things. We had Travelers come out with their 1981 release. Richard Seal comes out with cool new things 3 or 4 times a year. Mount Gay has all their new experimental things every year. And I think a lot of that came in response to the independent bottlers trying to put their own spin on things. You had SBS do their Worthy Park various cask finishes, and then Worthy started doing it. It's really been an explosion of rum.
We all recognize that what's on the shelf has changed some, but if you've been into rum here in the US for a while, you can just feel that something bigger than that is changing too. Rum societies are popping up across the country, conversations about rum, even though they still may have a long way to go, are getting smarter. Kate Perry's felt it too. She's the national manager of the American market for La Maison and Velier, another person who has played a massive role in putting more interesting rums on shelves. And she'll be the first to tell you it's not just the selection that's changing.
I also kind of see that side as I am the American manager for a European company. So I kind of see that juxtaposition. And in Europe, it feels like rum geeks are everywhere. And they're super intense and they know so much. And, a lot of people have had the chance to visit distilleries and to talk to the producers. And the community just feels really big and broad and widespread over there. Also, that being said, I see a very particular view being who I am and the company that I work for. So my lens is not different. I'm sure that all of Europe doesn't love rum, but that's what it feels like sometimes. And I think, a couple of years ago that started happening here too, where people, more and more people just love rum. So they decide to go to Jamaica to visit the distilleries on their holiday, or come out because they heard so-and-so's in town. And it just kind of feels like the level of geeky enjoyment has risen so much in America, where it's not just like, oh, it's this rum bottle, I don't know anything about it, let's just drink it. People just feel more invested in the distilleries, their practices, the liquid in the bottle, the people behind it. So I think that in the US market in the last couple of years, the level of access and interest in that access has really grown in a way that for me feels like it's, I don't know, just like really exciting and lovely and inspiring.
I know. Bottlers of esoteric rums believe enthusiasm for those rums is increasing. Shocking, right? But here's the thing. Producers in the Caribbean are seeing it too. There's a reason those both big and small, from Appleton to Ron del Barrilito, have invested millions in their tour experiences in recent years, not to mention 3 of the major Barbados distilleries coming together to launch the Barbados Rum Experience. Other producers are following suit, one of which happens to be St. Lucia Distillers, the company helmed by recently elected WIRSPA chairperson Margaret Monplaisir. The growing enthusiasm has been impossible to ignore.
And I'll give you the example in terms of our distillery tour. We've always offered a tour. It's not, it's a very basic tour. You come in, you see our distillery, you can taste all our products. It's not a fancy, highfalutin one. We are investing in a great new tour that will come in another 2 years or so. But we've always offered the tour, and our uptake was not great. People didn't aspire to come and see St. Lucia Distillers. Now visitors actually come on island and call to find out, okay, how can they get to see the St. Lucia Distillers store? How can they come and taste the rums? And that, I realize, is from on many online programs, people reading an article somewhere, people seeing some kind of podcast or something online, and that has given us tremendous exposure, especially for US visitors. So when people see our products, they're now recognizing them. They at least know the name, they've heard our reputation, and this, you can't buy that, you know. You're getting this through this forum, and I think this is wonderful for us.
Golden Age. Rum's about to have its moment. The next big thing. These are all phrases we've heard about rum again and again. They often come up alongside another word we've heard mentioned throughout our interviews for this episode. Yeah, you know the one.
Premiumization.
When we talk about rum premiumizing, though, rum enthusiasts are usually talking about two things. Rum getting the respect it's long deserved, and rum getting a bit more expensive. It's easy to see why this can be conflicting for a number of reasons. Just ask Zan Kong, the guy who's had a large hand in putting modern Jamaican rum staple Worthy Park on the map all over the world in recent years as its commercial manager of spirits.
Yeah, I guess I battle, right? Yeah, there's on one hand, yeah, of course we're a business, right? We if our bottles are higher price, we're making more money. But I think the beauty of rum, at least from our standpoint and coming from a Jamaican standpoint, is accessibility. Rum should always be a spirit that's affordable. Rum should always be a spirit that people can drink. But at the same time, and maybe to contradict myself, is because the category is growing, I think that people are getting more comfortable with paying higher price. But I think we as producers are having to show why the value is there. So it's a little crazy because, and I'm not talking for everybody, I'm talking for Worthy Park. And whereas, we're talking about, we're a brand that's farming, growing cane, making sugar, making molasses. So it's like where people and where consumers put a perceived value is not always in sync with where producers and suppliers put a value. There's so much of a value put in certain industries on where the product's coming from, but then it's like with rum, it's like, oh no, but rum should still be cheap, and it's like, well, really, like why is rum still fighting so hard to shed this image that there's no value in it when you look at just aging, right? Like aging in the Caribbean we lose so much more, and we're still fighting for people to take us seriously when we have a 12-year tropical age rum and distillery age product, and they still don't want to pay as much as they're paying for like a blended scotch. And it's like, well, no disrespect to blended scotch, but you're not comparing. There's a lot more that goes into what we're doing with a smaller, not necessarily mass produced product, right?
So here's the thing. For producers who want to do things the right way, it's not usually going to come cheap. Here's Maggie Campbell, estate manager at Mount Gay in Barbados.
For me, I get a little sad when I see people complain about a very modest price hike on some classic brands, because it really is very expensive to do business in this category. And it's a good thing for the reinvestment and the success of these companies, and being able to support the community and the places that create these rums. I think that, this idea that it should always just be abundantly available for cheap, it makes me a little sad. And I know that's not what everyone's saying, and I know that's not always everyone's intention, but I do think rum has been seriously undervalued. And I do think as the cost of especially using more sustainable energy sources goes up, the awareness and care for our water and taking care of our water resources. That is expensive.
Maggie is quick to point out she's a relative newcomer to making rum in the Caribbean, but talk to people who have spent their life in Caribbean rum, like Margaret Monplaisir, and you'll see that rum has been undervalued for a very long time.
Really and truly, one of my pet peeves is that, and it's within the Caribbean, and that rum does not get the respect it deserves. I recently did a certification program, and I was so disheartened when I opened the textbook and it said there are no standards for rum, and I immediately had to reach out and say, but hey, we got a CARICOM rum standard. We revise it every so many years, but we have standards. Rum is, I actually believe, when I started learning about all the various other spirits out there, and I started to compare rum to the other spirits, we have pretty high standards. I mean, rum has to adhere to some, in terms of aging, in terms of what it is. It's very limited in what it's made from, the number of years we age for, and I realize we're undervalued, we're underviewed, underrated, and I think there's much more that can be done for rum. So anything that helps grow rum as a category, because that's my pet peeve. Rum has got to be considered one of the best spirits in the world, and we have to make people really appreciate and understand rum. Yes, we do have standards. We have different styles of rum. Rum is versatile, but it is a fantastic spirit, and I think that's the message we need to get out there.
It's not only rum producers who think the category has been undervalued, though. When we talked to legendary rum writer, tiki authority, and bar owner Jeff Beachbum Berry, he agreed, even though he knows his own bills may stand to increase as rum gets the reputation it deserves.
I mean, as far as, here's another a glass half full thing about premiumization. The rum market was always undervalued. I mean, traditionally from the 60s, 70s, all the way up through the aughts, rum was being sold too cheap. It cost more to have a 10-year-old bourbon than a 20-year-old rum for a while. And I'm glad to see that they could charge true market value. I mean, charge what the rum is worth. I mean, it hurts. Of course, as someone who sells it, who buys it and sells it in a bar, I'd like those prices to remain artificially low. But my sympathies always go toward the producer. It's like, no, you should be getting the same. If this rum is more magnificent than any 20-year Scotch, you should be paid per bottle what Glenlivet's being paid for their equivalent.
The question for rum enthusiasts who also want to see appreciation for the rum category is, can we have our cake, or should I say rum, and drink it too? Is there a way for rum to grow in appreciation, in recognition, and yes, in some cases, price too, without it really turning into the craziness that we've seen in other spirit categories like we have most recently with bourbon?
So I almost hope that there isn't just like this flashpoint moment for rum, because I would really love it to grow like sustainably and meaningfully and not be some boom that we have that then has to course correct, like, because that can be really hard for different countries and different economies to absorb, right? A lot of people have been here doing this work for a long time. And, I don't want it to attract a ton of attention from people who are maybe not as invested in that reputation, but see more of just an opportunity. And then when the communication with the customer isn't as honest, or premiumization is based on not necessarily what's in the bottle, then we can lose customers, then we can lose rum's reputation. I do definitely, as a whiskey lover myself, I do see the concerns with, all of the, I remember when I worked in a specialty shop, we would get Pappy on allocation and it would sit on the shelf for months and no one would pick it up. And now I see what it's become. So also congratulations to that brand. I respect that as well. But I do know for rum, we create it so people can enjoy it. And especially in a lot of our local communities, it's like a food staple. It's a community staple, sort of like wine is in Europe. And so, we don't want it to not be that thing anymore. But I think you can see with a lot of brands, they have a mix of products that offer accessibility and easy pleasure and accessible pleasure, as well as some more cool specialty stuff. And I do hope in the coming years, some of the trends we see towards this premiumization are not going to be like, sometimes I see the big fancy releases and they're so expensive, but it's because they're like a jewel encrusted decanter. It's not what's inside the bottle, right? So I'm hoping we can keep focused on like what's inside the bottle, not getting too gimmicky, keeping it really like to the elements that are really so exciting about rum and so unique about its character.
Of course, we couldn't talk about premiumization without asking a fellow rum enthusiast for ideas. What do we as fans want to see as limited releases become more popular? Is there any hope to avoid the rise of allocation, secondary markets, and wild speculation? So we turned to the man who's had his finger on the pulse of limited release rums for well over a decade now, Lance Suersbally from thelonecaner.com. Naturally, he had a few ideas.
You got to remember that the big producers and even the medium-sized producers and their regular run of rums are actually quite available, whether it's the regular Hamptons or the regular Worthy Parks or the regular Appletons or the regular Durleys and Four Square rums and so on. But what you were actually talking about is the upscale stuff, the more premiumized product staying affordable. I think that's a losing battle. It can't be, because premium products, by their definition, tend to be more expensive to make, whether it's because of uber long aging, an exacting production process, heavily hyped marketing costs that have to be recouped. You're not going to win this one. The best you can hope for is a larger outturn of said product. And of course, for independent bottlers, that's the possibility because they tend to do one barrel at a time. You're not going to go anywhere with that. But I love what Velier did with the VSGB system that they set up. Right. And granted, that's, it's a finger in the dike, but the 20 CL bottles, love that shit. It was such a great idea, and it allowed everybody, not everybody, but a lot more people to have it. Like, for example, I have pretty much all of the complete set sitting down in Berlin. And last year I did have Alexandru from the Rum Barrel blog pop over to try as many of them as you wanted. But that would never have been possible if I had to buy each and every bottle by myself. I was able to afford the minis, or the 200 ml samples, which is 1/5 the size of a big one. And quite frankly, do we really need more than that if all we're trying to do is to figure out whether it's worth it? No, hell no. So I'd like to see that. And that's actually one of the points I have here, which is why it comes to mind so quickly. I'd like to see more bottlers put aside a little. It doesn't have to be the whole bloody thing. But you know what? If you're going to put out 10,000 bottles, is there a problem with taking 1,000 of them and just dividing them into 5 and putting them into minis that you can distribute far further to enthusiasts, to Rumfest, as gifts, as whatever? Because it does spread love a little bit more, and I'd like to see more of that. So that's one way of keeping the costs of such a big thing down for us pros who don't have, $500 to spend on the latest, greatest, and bestest. We just can't do this all the time. But if we can spend perhaps $50 to get a 200 ml or 100 ml bottle, then that takes away from the problem, doesn't it? And then we can make a decision whether, okay, shit, do I get this for my birthday? Do I tell the wife to buy this for me or whatever? So that's the only way I can see it. To me, I can't think of a single other way to do that, short of producing more. And then that, of course, just dilutes the specialness of what they're trying to put out there, isn't it?
Rum's growth as a category hasn't just attracted more premium releases from the brands we already know. It's also attracted entirely new distilleries from all around the world to enter the global picture, whether they're just getting started or simply getting their rums beyond their local markets for the first time ever. And the best part? A lot of them are pretty damn good, even to the skeptics, including the aforementioned Jeff Beachbum Barry, who's chosen to start stocking quite a few of those newer global rums in his famous New Orleans bar, Latitude 29.
I'm a bit prejudiced. The Caribbean has been producing rum for centuries, and they've got it down. And I always would maintain that the best rums come from the Caribbean. I've had to kind of change that now because there's stuff coming from Mexico that's really interesting. There's stuff coming from South America that's interesting, which there didn't used to be. Used to be South American rums were all just really, really super sweet and not really drinkable, but that's changing. We're getting rums now. We've got Equiano which is a combination of a bottling from Mauritius and also Barbados, which is a fascinating kind of combination. It's Ian Burrell's little thing there, and that's just great juice. I'm finding a lot more interesting stuff coming out of Hawaii. Hawaiian rum used to just be, 10 years ago, mostly just swill that you sold to tourists, and And now they're coming up with some fantastic stuff. Culiana is coming up with great stuff. There's several other brands that are doing world-class sugarcane agricole style rums. Lovely expressions. Didn't see that coming. So it's more of a global perspective now.
The rise of these global distilleries hasn't escaped producers in the Caribbean, by the way. It was one of the first things Worthy Park's senior blender, Craig Nicholson, pointed to when we chatted with him.
So many newer distilleries, so many small craft or micro distilleries popping up all over the world. And I think that as the reputation of rum grows and starts to change and the perception of it gets a little bit better internationally, I feel like more and more of these smaller distilleries are going to start coming on board.
We'll hear more from Craig later, but among this wide category of global rums, there was one emerging region that came up maybe more than any other one as one to watch. It wasn't much of a surprise when one of the first guests to bring it up turned out to be the only person in the world who's hosted rum tastings on all 7 continents. Yes, that includes Antarctica. I'm talking about the global rum ambassador himself, Ian Burrell.
Other than that, it's new regions. It's new regions getting back into rums or just getting into rums on an international perspective. I love seeing the continent of Africa now starting to make a little bit of noise with rums coming out of one of the various countries out there. And we'll see a lot more in the near future. So a lot of that has started in the last 5 years. So yeah, it's just rums from unknown or uncharted territories that's exciting me.
Africa. That's the place we heard more excitement for than any other, which is partially why we chose to style this segment with some lovely African percussion work.
Rums from the African continent.
But across, the large continent of Africa, there's a lot of producers coming out.
Places like Liberia and Ghana.
Africa, from Ghana, from South Africa.
There's stuff going on in Cameroon and Senegal. That there's another new distillery in Kenya, another one in Malawi that's just started opening up as part of a restaurant.
You can rest assured the Rumcast will be watching Africa closely over the next few years. But that won't be the only region. We heard nearly as much enthusiasm for South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific region as well.
We're going to start to see a lot more from Asia, I think. There's a lot happening in India, in the Philippines, in Thailand, Japan.
Yeah, I'm excited about some of the cool, exciting things we're seeing coming out of small producers out of Asia. I just saw a really exciting petite pot still in the Philippines, and I was cheering that team on.
And of course, what a lot of the Asian countries are coming out with is phenomenal.
Zooming out, Africa and the Asian Pacific regions may have gotten a lot of our guests fired up the most, but we all know that this is a global phenomenon. The UK, the United States, Australia, India, Mexico, there are tons of places we could throw in here as well that are getting more and more attention for rum. The question is, where's all this going? What can we expect from this growing international smorgasbord of rum producers in the coming years? Lance offered some nice perspective here.
So that's all really quite interesting. And it points to me to 2 things at the same time. One of which is it's not like a movement away from the medium-sized producers or the global behemoths like Diageo or Tanduay or Bacardi. But they're taking like a niche approach. It's usually one person, one small thing. And you know what? In 1862, old Facundo probably had some small little rinky-dink in the back of his shop somewhere. And that's exactly what we're seeing now again, as there's this niche of quality craft, organics, terroir-driven spirits that people perhaps don't know very much about, but they're very interested in trying. And maybe the market right now is just regional, but it will become a little bit more global if they get the right distribution and if they manage to get themselves into a rum festival where people who do write about this stuff on a constant basis, like Amrita with his blog or Ready Set Rum over in Florida, I think he is, and a couple of once people start talking about it, then distributors start to take interest, and then we'll get to see more of them, especially if they start to import them into the countries where we live.
This, of course, is the optimistic view, but we've talked to enough rum producers to know that this isn't an easy business. Breaking into a category that, as we've already established, still isn't quite getting the respect it deserves is an uphill battle. How many of these new producers can we expect to survive long enough to actually reach more parts of the globe? What kinds of challenges will they face as they try to expand to new markets? Ed Hamilton, the original minister of rum, importer, bottler, and now brand owner himself, gave us his perspective by sharing a couple of conversations he recently had with newer, smaller producers who will keep anonymous.
And he says, my challenge is, his challenge is getting something into production that he can compete with pricing or in the US market. And he says, yeah, I'm doing okay with my limited releases, but the distribution is such a pain in the ass because distributors don't seem to get it. They don't buy enough, and and small production. That's the problem with small production. So he says, I need something, you've got white stash. And he says, I can't compete with that. I can't ferment and distill and put it out there at the price you're doing. I said, yeah, that's the problem with small production. So you have to get to bigger production, and it's economy of scale. And, I just met a couple of distillers in Auckland, New Zealand, and they said, what do you think of our rum? And I said, well, it's a good try, good try. It's not horrible, but I hope you're not looking to try to take over the U.S. market. And they go, no, we've been watching what you're doing. We know it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to get a product that's ready to go beyond our local area. And everybody at the table agreed. There were half a dozen bartenders, and everybody agreed, yeah, but it's getting better than it used to be. We're learning. Well, you gotta step up. You're competing with people that have been making this stuff for 300 years. That's a tough nut to crack. So, when we see a lot of these new brands come in, good luck.
Scaling can definitely be a challenge for new producers, but not every new producer aims to start small. No one is going to start with the massive scale of a Bacardi or even an Appleton, but we have seen producers pop up in recent history that start with more than just one tiny still. Renegade Distillery in Grenada is one example. If we want to zoom out even further, Worthy Park is another, having started less than 20 years ago. Their capacity is nowhere near the behemoths mentioned earlier, but it's still significantly higher than your average local craft distillery. The path to long-term viability for these producers looks a little different. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to Steve McGarry, CEO and distiller at a new entrant into the Australian rum scene, Sydney Rum Distillery. Here's Steve on the approach they're taking to eventually reach rum enthusiasts not only in their own backyard, but around the world.
The business model and the intent from day one with the Sydney Rum Distillery company and philosophy is a large-scale format distillery in perspective of the Australian industry. So as I mentioned before, the two largest producers in Australia currently, what our target is to come in between the two of those and actually be the second largest producer in Australia. So these things don't happen overnight, certainly are progressing. But it all comes back to and the core reason for this focus is economy of scale, and it is being able to be globally competitive, because we are looking to a 80 to 85% export focus. Yes, we will be building the business and the brands. I will say brands in the domestic space in Australia, but we ultimately recognize that it's a global game. And so we have to have that production facility, manufacturing facility scaled appropriately that we can target the globe. So we're approaching this quite different to the most, if not all, of the other craft rum producers here in Australia who are incremental expansion, scale up, and that's typical in the craft space that we see globally.
As we think about these newer medium-scale distilleries, let's go back to Worthy Park. Like we mentioned earlier, it hasn't even been around for 2 decades, yet I think it's fair to say that it's already developed a reputation among rum enthusiasts as one of the best distilleries in the world. As we were talking to Zan and Craig, we couldn't help but think, how did they manage to pull this off so quickly? Obviously, being in Jamaica is an advantage. The country already has a reputation for making incredible rum, and they would have to have access to highly skilled, experienced rum professionals. But is the answer really just that simple? Or is there more to it that other aspiring producers could learn from? Here's what they had to say.
When you look at viability of building a new distillery, the fact that we have the building blocks of making rum here already being made in terms of we have our molasses, cane juice if we're making from cane juice. We have, various deep water wells through the limestone aquifer. We just needed the building, and then also having, and the facilities, but also having that, we're not a new company. We're an established company, and we're kind of, we shifted our business model. We added to the business model. That helped, right? Like we built our distillery in 2005, commissioned in 2005, and we didn't have a brand until 2007. 2 years of making product and not having a brand, like that's a luxury that, I think we sometimes maybe don't acknowledge or don't realize, but I think for us that was a huge luxury, right? The fact that we had that, and then launching in Jamaica, which is a huge rum consuming country, we went with a white overproof rum, which again, it's unaged, and there really wasn't. It's a very big market with not a lot of competition within the market. So I think we're very, I guess, lucky or whatever it is to be able to be in a country where there's a lot of our product being consumed. And then when we decided to launch onto the international stage, we already had a very strong brand at home, right? We're already an established brand at home. We had a lot of recognition in terms of, and a lot of experience in doing what we're doing. And then I was just bringing it out to the world. And I think that was always, I'm not going to speak for Gordon, but he's our CEO, but I know he's told me before that, we always wanted to have a strong brand at home to be a strong Jamaican rum before we're going overseas, right? So we had that. And then again, to his credit and to the Worthy Park credit, when we built our distillery, we only put in a pot still, which now in 2024, which we're in, yeah, that makes sense. Pot still rum, but think back to 2005, and there's virtually no 100% pot still rums out there. So being able to at the time kind of have the forethought or foresight to, and that's not a play on words because we have a foresight still, but having the that ability to kind of have that vision to put in something which is very Jamaican but not very current in terms of what is on the market, I think was a big benefit, because now we're obviously reaping the benefit of that, but it's taken what is it now, 18 years since we built the distillery. And just for the record, we're still a small brand, so before I get get on the big brands radar, we're still a very, very small brand, but we're slowly but surely building a name for ourselves.
Craig may work for Worthy Park now, but he was able to reach way back into his college days to give us a consumer perspective of what it was like in Jamaica when the distillery's first brand arrived.
When Worthy Park started distilling, when they launched Rum Bar initially, I was still in college. And I remember when they hit the ground running. Like everywhere you went, you saw a Rum Bar. They rolled out with a massive marketing campaign. Like it was everywhere. And from you get in people's faces and then you're able to maintain that presence, that's the other thing. They came out running, but then they were able to maintain the presence. And I think that is what definitely helped Worthy Park.
Okay, so if you have money for larger scale production and major marketing campaigns, you're set, right? Not necessarily. Ed Hamilton reminded us of a certain distillery in Trinidad that had both and still didn't manage to stick around.
You guys remember 10 Cane?
Yep.
Yes.
What do you think they spent on 10 Cane?
That's a good question. Probably a decent amount. I mean, they had major backing from Moet Hennessy, right?
Yeah, it was LVMH.
I don't know, maybe 10 million?
More.
More?
No, it was a lot more than 10 million.
Wow.
And when I talked to people there, I was hired as a consultant on that project. And there were several things that, just didn't add up with the whole project. And when it finally crashed And when they took it off the market, I was talking to some people about it. And I said, so, let's look at the basic failure analysis. You didn't have the production capabilities to do what you were trying to do. And then you were trying to go after a premium market. The product wasn't quite there. It was close. It was good. It was better than a lot of other things, but it wasn't as good as Nissan Blanc, for example. That 10 cane project was put together in less than 3 years, and they spent millions and millions, tens of millions, and then it failed, which just goes to show, just because you've got a bunch of money doesn't mean you're going to make it work. And then when you look at other things that have failed and how do you get it going, and it's a tough business. It's almost easier making money on podcasts.
Almost.
Maybe less risk
Close.
involved, probably. We didn't exactly put 10 million. The figure was close to 10 million that we invested into starting up this show, but not quite that high.
Yeah, there was a 10 in there.
Yeah, there was a 10 in there.
So I'm sure you've noticed a couple of references so far to bulk rum. When we talk about bulk rum, we're mostly talking about one thing: distilleries selling a sizable quantity of their liquid to Dutch rum blenders E&A Scheer. E&A Scheer buys rum from distilleries of all sizes from just about everywhere in the world, including pretty much all of the countries we've mentioned so far. Then they blend and sell that rum to third-party brands who bottle and market it themselves. Go to your favorite liquor store, and there's a good chance a number of the rums on the shelf there were originally sourced and blended by E&A Scheer. Regardless of your opinions on bulk rum, though, you can't talk about the modern rum industry without recognizing E&A Scheer's role in shaping it. Of course, when we tell this to CEO Carsten Vlierboom, he downplays things just a tad.
You give us a lot of credit. I mean, we're facilitators in the rum industry, right? So it's not as if something we do affects the rum industry, but we are sort of involved in we're really in the middle between distillers and brands, and we have this position which is quite interesting. You do get a very, very wide perspective on what's going on.
Whether they're buying unaged rum from brand new distilleries or rare single casks through another company they own called the Main Rum Company, E&A Scheer gives rum producers of all sizes a way to get upfront money for something that might take them a lot more time to sell themselves. They don't have to wait on aging it or invest in marketing it.
Yeah, well, we were in contact with a lot of these people, and where you see the changes is that we have to show these people that we're not just a business of doing big things, not just ISO tanks and stuff, but smaller things. Getting a few IBCs or a few IBCs out of West Africa, places like Liberia and Ghana it's not something which anybody can do, but we have the capability of doing that. The thinking in our case is more often than not, how can we help this producer grow? There's a lot of these small starting producers that, when you start producing rum and you have to put it in the bottle, you have to market it, you have to, do a lot of effort to sell that bottle and put that in the market. That is a long-term gain. Whereas they have this production capacity, they have something to do, so we can actually help them by taking some of their earlier stuff and basically already give them some income to work with. Let's say starting in a whiskey industry, people would start selling gin before they sell whiskey, because whiskey is only whiskey after 3 years in Scotland, right? So that type of thing, helping these young startups with their initial sales and also bringing their name out into quite a network is interesting for a lot of starting smaller distilleries.
As far as Steve McGarry is concerned, bulk rum and cask sales to independent bottlers are really the main reason why rum enthusiasts across the world are now aware of Australian rum.
So if we go back to the original question about what's happened in the last 4 years, that would be my number 2 thing, is what we all, the rum geeks, see has happened and blossomed in the independent bottling scene. And a lot of that credit must go to E&A Scheer and Main Rum Company. First and foremost, with the latest news from them, but with that is the foresight and looking on the horizon. Even if you look back 5, 10, 15 years ago, in proactively going out and sourcing all these new origins, liquids, new distilleries, or coming to Australia, for example, and finding Australian rum and taking into the European bottling scene or independent bottling scene, and then expanding that to the UK, US, elsewhere around the globe. And a lot of Australian rums that are in independent bottlings is due to the likes of Scheer. So when we look at the last 4 years of, for example, with independent bottling, it's a massive opportunity, and I'm fortunate enough to be part of that journey. And looking at, for example, now I'm aware of, I think it's 60 plus bottlings globally that have Australian rum in them, in different brands, whether it's a single vintage, whether it's a blend. It's a fantastic opportunity, but it's also how you harness and how you leverage that opportunity as well. And that's where, to me, it's very important in getting that mix right for brand development, brand equity, and obviously collaboration opportunities, partnerships, and just building that consumer awareness. And that's something that we're very acutely aware of.
On the other hand, one of the trends we've talked about over the years since the Rumcast started is growing distilleries scaling back, or in some cases even cutting off completely, their sales to bulk suppliers and independent bottlers. From St. Lucia Distillers to Worthy Park to plenty of other major distilleries that we've heard rumors about, it seems like more and more are making the decision to keep their rums at home. We talked to Zan Kong and Margaret Monplaisir about why. Here's Zan.
At least from our standpoint, we have drastically cut back on bulk rum availability because our own brands are growing, and we're trying to find that balance between, making rum and storing it, aging it for our own purposes, or selling it and getting cash, immediately. So it's a balance. Again, I can't speak for other producers around the world, but I think for us, we're trying to focus on building our own brands and getting that value. But I don't see the demand for independent bottlers or bulk rum lessening at all. And again, just for the record, I'm not a person that says there's no room for independent bottlers, or there's no, the bulk rum. You're right. I think every distillery starting out, bulk rum is that lifeline that you need. And I'd be completely bullshitting if I said it wasn't still a big part of our business. But it's, age rum is finite, right? Like, we can't go back and if we go through all of our rum from 2009, I can't go back and make rum from 2009. So that's where the balance comes in, right? Like, we can always, we can ramp up our unaged rum production fairly quickly and fairly easily, but I can't do that for aged rum. So we're now trying to age more rum, to, again, hedge for the future. Whereas, our brands are growing on the trajectory they are, we need more rum. And again, if we get to a point where we can start selling bulk rum again, aged bulk rum, we have it there and it's available. So, and again, don't get me wrong, everybody that's listening, a lot of the reason that Worthy Park got on the names of people in the global world is because of independent bottlers. And when we made our decision in 2017, 2018 to restrict the use of Worthy Park name and trademark on independent bottlers, like, man, people were angry. Like, some people, like, a lot of people got it, but there was a lot of people like, man, you guys can't believe we're doing that. Like, it's so disrespectful to the independent butler. I was like, I'm sorry you feel that way, but we're looking ahead in the future and saying, hey, not even looking in the future, but we're also looking back 350 years of Worthy Park being established, and it's not something that we necessarily want to allow to be out there, right? In terms of other people using our trademark. So yeah, I think a lot of independent bottlers are great for getting to a lot of people, because, I mean, look at Eric. Eric's my friend, Eric from Holmes, and his ability, especially in America right now, because I think he's really one of the top independent bottlers in the States, for rum, if not the, and his ability to walk into, whether it's a bar, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a rum show, and give people a dozen, just for argument's sake, top quality rums from across the world, like, that's unparalleled, right? Like, again, the guys in South Africa can't come to Miami for Miami Rum Congress every year and then go to New York and then Chicago and all these events. But you have somebody like Eric who is going everywhere and showcasing dozens of producers in one go. Like that's huge, huge, huge. It can't be discounted. But yes, brands will get to a certain point where if their business model is to grow their own distillery brands, then they may look at it differently.
Over at St. Lucia Distillers, Margaret cited similar reasons for pulling back from bulk suppliers and independent bottlers.
There's always going to be a demand for own label rums and independent bottlers, and so I think there's always going to be a demand for that. In our case, we just did not have the capacity. Once we started to export and create our own brands, we didn't have the capacity. But you have huge distilleries. We're minute. There are some huge distilleries with the additional volume, and this, obviously helps absorb the overhead costs. So it would make sense to continue to supply. So I don't think that relationship, I think maybe there's going to be fewer, it's going to be limited to the much larger distilleries. There are going to be fewer opportunities in terms of for the private bottlings and so. But that relationship is going to absolutely continue. There's always going to be that demand.
Holding on to more of their rum is one way for distilleries to retain a greater share of the rum's value over the long term, but it's not the only step many are taking. Over the last few years, geographical indications, or GIs, have been a constant topic of conversation. Essentially, a GI functions like a kind of intellectual property. Think of it like only wine prepared a certain way in a certain region of France being allowed to label itself champagne. It's a way of defining and owning a descriptor of quality, like Barbados rum or Jamaica rum, for example. I mention those, of course, because they've generated the most debate and discussion lately, but they're not the only places that have them. In fact, the EU approved a GI for Demerara rum back in 2021. Now, it would take an entire episode of its own to wade through the debates surrounding the aforementioned GIs, and we've dedicated time to some of them on past episodes. So for our purposes here, we're instead going to look at why we've seen such a push for GIs recently, and why we're likely to see more in the near future, including a new one you'll learn about on this very episode. First, we'll hear from Ian Burrell, who has been a vocal supporter of GIs, on the role they can play for rum-producing countries and regions.
In regard to the GI, we'll start with that part, the GI conversation. I am 1,000% for any country, any area or territory that wants to try to attain and get a GI to protect themselves and to protect themselves from some of the undesirable rum companies that are out there or organizations out there that just basically want to take advantage or try and use a colonial model where it's like, we'll just take from our colonies and then create the value abroad in the Western society or the Western world. So I'm definitely against that because, again, we've come a long way from 400 years ago, 300 years ago, 200 years ago to be stuck in that same mindset of let's just take from, say, just for example, the Caribbean, bring it to Europe and create the value inside Europe. So that's one thing. So I'm always for any country that does the GI. I've been working with countries like Madeira, for example, islands of Madeira, to enforce that. They've got their own GI, but they've been enforcing that around Europe. And then eventually, hopefully in America, where they come in there, and legally in Europe, it's one of the only areas that are allowed to use the word rum agricole, for example, Madeira. I initially started working with Mauritius back in 2008, trying to get the distilleries working together to create a Mauritian GI. That's taken a little bit longer, but again, those conversations are starting. And then, of course, we have the Caribbean, the established island. Jamaica has theirs. Barbados is fighting to create theirs at the moment. And if they don't get an official GI, they'll just create a trademark that has to be used to define what you are. But the reason why things like that are important is for the transparency conversation. If I said to you, I'm going to drink this single malt Scotch whiskey from, and no disrespect to Afghanistan, but Afghanistan. And the reason why I say that is because we may have preconceptions of what Afghanistan is as a country when it comes to making spirits, but we have no idea what that single malt whiskey is going to be like. From there, it could be good, it could be bad. We have no idea. But if I said a single malt Scotch whiskey, you have a prejudice or prejudgment of what that whiskey potentially could be like. Also have it's also transparent because you know the rules and regulations of that particular region. You know it's not going to have any sugar in there. You know it's going to be aged for a minimum of 3 years. You know it's going to be pot stilled. You know it's going to be from a single distillery. That's what we want in rum, and that's where the transparency comes in. If I see a rum from an area that I don't know, I'm not expecting them to be transparent. Yeah. If they put an age claim on there and they stick maybe Solera on there and that type of thing, then I'm not sure as a consumer. I'm not even sure as someone who drinks a lot of rum what's actually inside that bottle. I have to believe what they say. But if they're from an area where their region is protected and those laws are enforced, I now pretty much 99.9% recurring believe them. If something's from Jamaica and it's aged a certain way, or it's got a minimum age statement on there, I know it's that age because it's protected. They're transparent through their GI. So I rely on the rules and regulations of that particular territory to tell me what's in that bottle, even before I get into the bottle and then say, oh, it's too strong for me. But at least the transparency is their label, is the protection that they have for their geography.
So we mentioned earlier a new GI that you'd learn about on this episode. If you guessed that it's being authored by one of the producers you've already heard from, you'd be correct.
Well, I'm going to give you a little secret. Shh, don't tell anybody, okay? So we're working on our GI. We should be registering shortly.
Oh, okay.
So yes, we want to establish our national standards for St. Lucia, and so indeed we had that I think is the next big set of news.
Yeah. So why exactly is St. Lucia Distillers pushing for a St. Lucia rum GI? What does it do for them in the long run? Here's what Margaret told us.
Okay, well, in essence, I mean, you may have seen product from St. Lucia being advertised around the world, other people selling product that came from St. Lucia. What this will allow is that we're looking at a GI that requires our products to be fermented, distilled, aged, and blended in St. Lucia. And it must have water from St. Lucia. That's what I mean, because all our rums are blended with rainwater that we collect ourselves and treat and blend. This is what we use to blend our products. So this will ensure that our product has to be made here to specific standards, because the environment, having gone through now this GI process is when I have an appreciation for how much the environment, and I mean, I've learned this through studying wines where they spoke of the terroir. The local environment directly impacts, so it's the quality of the water you get, the type of aging that occurs, how it occurs, the flavors that come through on your product. That impacts all of those things, and we want to maintain that for St. Lucia rum so that it is consistent, and everybody knows what they're getting when they're getting a St. Lucia rum. That is what a GI is going to give you, that level of protection, that it must be made here, nobody else can make our rum.
And it's not just the Caribbean. Even Australia is already thinking toward what a GI or something equivalent of their own could look like. Here's Steve McGarry to walk us through the conversations taking place.
It's a robust conversation that we are, as producers, we are trying to promote and at least have and be proactive in having the conversation, and not just burying our head in the sand and obviously we see these other GI conversations happening globally. So it's how do we define Australian rum? Is that do we go down the road of a full-blown GI type or technical file? Well, the Australian Distillers Association, our association group, is actually looking to do this as a technical file, to describe or at least classify what is Australian rum. We have a 2-year minimum age statement rule here. We are allowed to use crystal sugar in rum. So that right there is a very divisive discussion in the industry. Is it rum? Is it not rum? How is that perceived globally? Yes, you could export a rum An Australian rum made from crystal sugar, you could export into the US, no problem. Can it go into the EU? Never. So then you've got the other, more traditional purist type producers will use molasses or juice all day long. Well, that product can go global. But fundamentally, that then still comes back to the Australian consumer education awareness. It's very young here. A lot of the questions and a lot of the inquiries I field out of talking to people in the States or in Europe and UK. It's very educated consumer, very educated questions versus what we would otherwise be fielding here in Australia. So again, the onus is back on the Australian producers, rum producers, to, as I guess, essentially self-regulate to a classification, a technical file, and then promoting that out to the industry.
Increased accessibility, new regions, premiumizations, GIs. We've touched on a lot of the key developments that have shaped the last several years of rum already. But there's one more event you might be wondering why we haven't brought up yet. The COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, you can't really sum up the past few years of rum without mentioning its impact, but at the same time, it's been discussed so much since 2020 that most rum enthusiasts get the picture by now. Supply chain issues, more online rum content, more people making cocktails at home, those are just a few of the storylines we've heard about time and time again. That said, there's still some lingering effects that we think are worth mentioning before we transition over to predictions for the future. For example, those supply chain issues? Yeah, they're still being felt in ways you might not even expect. Here's Margaret Monplaisir on the complications in molasses sourcing, which has become a lot more expensive since 2020.
I think molasses will always be available. The problem with it is the transportation. The Panama Canal was a blockage, which is why we were suffering with high costs and so. However, I am aware that a number of distilleries are pursuing the sugarcane option, but making molasses, like a sugarcane syrup. And so a number of distilleries are pursuing this and doing research. It's a little bit premature, so that's why I can't sit here and definitively tell you, well, yes, this is an angle that we will be going, in the future. But indeed, there are options, and research is being done at this point in time. Molasses for the next few years will be a challenge. Unfortunately, this is one of the hazards of COVID that we're still having to deal with, that backlog. But it is available, and we will have our supplies. We just need to know how to handle it properly. In terms of St. Lucia, we've been expanding our fields. So we've been buying a lot of the land around to increase, but we're sticking to making rum from the sugarcane juice rather than creating the syrup to give the same effect as the molasses-based rum.
And it's not just the producers who are still feeling the pain. Over at Latitude 29, Jeff Berry still can't get many of the staples that were powering his bar's drinks.
Well, the one thing that's different for me now, radically from 4 years ago, before the pandemic, is that the supply chain has been not just interrupted, but in some cases just broken. We have at Latitude 29, we haven't been able to get a lot of the expressions that we used to be able to get. Apparently, bottlers are still having problems getting glass bottles, and there's transportation problems and all this other stuff. So it's been kind of a little bit of a drought for us on some of the expressions that we really like, which unfortunately are not major label, global conglomerate portfolio pieces. Those still have no problem getting, but the interesting stuff, for the most part, it's the small distillers that are doing the interesting stuff, and they're finding it, at least from what I've seen they must be finding it more difficult to get their stuff to market. We're just sort of waiting for things to get back to normal and hope that this isn't the new normal.
So far, we've spent most of our time talking about rum's present and recent past. But what will the next 5 years or so look like for rum? We made sure to ask each of our guests before we let them go. Here are some of the predictions that stood out to us the most, starting with a couple of areas we just discussed: GIs and distilleries' relationships with bulk suppliers and independent bottlers. Here's Craig from Worthy Park again.
And I think also that something that we might also see, as it just came to me, is we do sell a lot of bulk rum. But in terms of, since we're working on that GI, we're working on what it is that can be described or classified as a Jamaican rum, perchance, then you might see a drawback in the amount of bulk rum that is being sold to independent bottlers, possibly, as more and more producers here focus on getting that premium products here in Jamaica, so that they can definitely say that, listen, this is a Jamaican rum that we're putting out there.
So, for example, if it must be aged in Jamaica, more people may start holding it back in Jamaica.
Holding it back, right? Yeah, and on that end, like, you might see like more people investing here so that they can get their rum aged here, because it has to be kept here in Jamaica. So you can maybe we will see a growing business as it regards to like more warehousing and aging of rum here for other companies.
As a matter of fact, aging at origin is something E&A Scheer has been doing increasingly in recent years and only plans to do more of going forward.
We have quite a few origins where we're aging now, because and I tend to say that internally as well. It's not about tropical aging or continental aging. It's about aging at origin or aging in another place or keeping it in another place. So we age at origin, and that means you have to approach the distillers in a slightly different way, because they have to have the space for you. They have to have the knowledge that we at least want them to, if they age at origin, we want them to be professional about it in the way that they're used to doing it. And then we want to understand how they age at origin. It's not us trying to tell them what to do. That's not how we work. We like a distiller to decide what his method of production is, what their best practice is, and we take it as they make it.
While we're on the note of E&A Scheer, we should probably cover the news that broke only a couple of days before we interviewed Carsten for this episode. An investment firm called Platinum Equity acquired E&A Scheer. Platinum Equity co-president Louis Sampson said that Scheer, quote, plays a unique and essential role in the global rum market, end quote. He went on to say that, quote, the rum category has promising prospects driven in part by the increasing popularity of new craft brands and the trend toward premiumization. We are excited to help the company capitalize on these opportunities by investing in the company's continued success, end quote. Well, hey, there's a bunch of buzzwords we've been mentioning all episode. The question is, what does this mean? Are big changes coming? Should rum enthusiasts be worried about corporate overlords meddling in the global rum trade? Are we overreacting? Here's what Carsten had to say about what the acquisition means going forward.
Well, I expect more of the same, really. That's it. Because there's this grand old term called business as usual, because it's just part of a refinancing operation, if for lack of a better word, where some of the shareholders, which is a private equity group, actually rolls over their shares into a new private equity group, and that's what they do for a business, and they have like a cycle of every 5 years, which is spot on what happened with us. 5 years ago in 2019, we had a private equity group come in to buy out some of the shares of deceased shareholders, and now 5 years later, there's another private equity group taking those shares again. But family is still there, the old family, and I'm still there as co-owners. You're not going to get rid of me, so more the same.
Now, we already spent a bunch of time talking about the rise of new rum-producing regions, but might we also see some new distilleries popping up in the Caribbean very soon? We know about Scotch whiskey producer Kilchoman's rum project in Barbados, but Ian Burrell says we should expect more.
You'll see a few new brands and distilleries popping up in traditional rum producing countries, just because of the fact that rum is growing at an alarming rate. But there's also more money now for investment, because people are thinking, well, you know what, if we're making all this money, all that money is being made on whiskey and other craft spirits, why can't we do it on the category that everyone says is the next big thing, is the fastest growing? We know of one, possibly two, in Barbados. The Grenadans, we have Renegade and Grenada doing some great, as they call, pre-casks, but now they're aging some of that, so we can see that timeline of how these rums are growing. That's exciting part of the next 5 years, just seeing how the rums that are doing really well now, how they developed 5 years later, and how they follow in that trajectory. But you will see some of these small little boutique ones as well. And that's also exciting. If you are going to do something craft, why not do it inside a place where you have ample sugarcane growing? You've got a great environment to tropically age and tropically mature your product. So you will see some boutique places trying to keep my lips closed, but in islands of the Caribbean that may not have any distilleries at the moment, but they are looking and probably will be getting some small little tiny boutique hybrid stills where they can just create their own little legacy. But it's exciting to see the Caribbean doing that.
Also, since a good chunk of our audience is US-based, we have to highlight that more established rum brands that aren't currently distributed here will be arriving as well. In fact, Ed Hamilton shared that he himself will be bringing one such brand here very soon.
I'm happy. I just got a rum from Guadeloupe, and it's barely got any distribution because it came in and I got it in August, I believe. Well, you start talking to distributors about a new product in end of August, September, you can imagine their first response is, hey man, we can't deal with anything right now in September. We got O&D coming up. Like O&D is the god of the liquor spirits industry. I mean, everybody's just overwhelmed with O&D. We got to make our numbers with O&D. We'll talk to you next year. Yeah, okay, fine. I spent 20 years trying to get this brand. It's okay. I'll wait. I got time.
Can you mention what brand that is?
Sure, Boulogne.
That's great. Yeah, I was just talking about Boulogne as I ordered a bottle from Europe of just the 100 proof Blanc, and I was blown away at how good it was for how little it cost.
You're blown away? Is that what you said?
I was blown away, yeah. I didn't catch that, but yeah, you're on top of it. Kate Perry thinks there's another avenue by which more and more rums will reach the U.S. market: independent bottlers. In the last few years, we've already seen American IBs like Holmes Key, Raising Glasses, Down Island, and Rolling Fork enter the picture. Kate thinks we can bet on more coming soon.
Again, as the reflection against the European market as a frame of reference, I think that our geeks are catching up quickly with the level of geekdom of the European market. And I think that with that, and especially combined with the American sense of entrepreneurship, we're going to really start to see the strong rise of American independent bottlings. I think a lot of people, you see it in the whiskey game right now. There are so many different whiskey groups, different whiskey lovers, different fans of people being like, oh, well, I could just buy MGP and bottle it myself. Why not? And in the last couple of years, we've seen an explosion across the bourbon category of everybody, every whiskey group, every whiskey society, every little niche all has their own bottlings. And I think that we'll see that in rum too, because it's not hard to do it. There's platforms out there. If you have the money and time and attention, there are, companies set up to help you with this. So I think that in the US market, we're going to see the rise of IBs across rum. It's already starting to happen. The European market is super strong with this. There's tons and tons of independent bottlers. And I think that will happen here as well.
But category growth doesn't just lead to new companies. It also leads to acquisitions. Just last year, we saw Brown-Forman complete its purchase of Venezuelan rum producer Diplomatico, for example. Might we see more of that? Jeff Berry thinks so. And for now, he's trying to look on the potential bright side.
More and more corporate octopus behavior, more and more consolidation, more and more brands being absorbed into the big, giant multinationals. I've been fairly negative about this up till now, but what about the possible upside, which is that if Diageo or Pernod Ricard buy a brand, that brand is going to have a lot better distribution. So brands that may have been impossible to get because local distributors go, no, unless you can buy a pallet of that a month, I'm not going to bring it in. If Diageo is behind it, that's going to change. So it may result in more interesting rums being brought to places that couldn't experience them before, as long as there's no creative interference by the corporate overlord and the brand, then I'm fine with that.
With acquisitions, new brands, and increased competition on the horizon, it's worth asking the question, how do all these rums plan on standing out from one another on the shelf? Lance from the Lone Caner had a few ideas on what he thinks we're going to see.
And one of the other ways that they will have to distinguish themselves is segmentation of the entire production process. So you're going to have the parcelaires start to become a much bigger thing for the smaller places that have a couple of fields here and a couple of fields there and always have had a reputation for good quality. So you're going to have cane varietal specialization. Oh, we only use Madame Muse cane, or we only use red or blue cane, or whatever. The terroir, the different woods that they might decide to age things in. You're already starting to see all these sherry and cask finishes or double maturations or whatever. This is going to be a thing, a much bigger thing than it already is. Granted, Brazil already uses a number of different woods in its cachaças, but I think we are already seeing some Japanese. Renaissance did that. They have this particular type of wood out of Japan that they use that they wanted to try that really did some very.
Yeah,
that's the one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So experiments like that are going to continue, and the whole business about going organic and having these street cred credentials. Oh yeah, we're sustainable and we are carbon neutral and we're organic and so on is going to become a bigger part of marketing ever before. All the new ones are going to start going in that direction. But at the end of the day, it's all about distinguishing themselves from everybody else who's doing or trying to do the same kind of rum, but here's our method. And the cynic in me likes to think, oh, it's just the same thing that we used to hear 15 years ago. Oh yes, this is our family recipe and we don't make it like anybody else. Okay, that may be true, but it's hard to tell. There's a lot of mistrust going on, and if you've got trust, that's great, but if you lose it even one time, you'll never be forgiven for the rest of your life. As we've seen with Flor de Caña, for example, or even for, plantation/planteria. They're just never going to be trusted by anybody who is in this part of the world. But if you've got it, if they like you, if you've shown that you're transparent, you're honest, what you put out is actually what is in that rum, and what you say is no bullshit, then, people will give you a lot of slack. And they will absolutely tell you, and they will buy your stuff and they will shout your praises to the heavens, and then you're the success that you want to be, right? At least I hope so.
The more we hear environmental claims from large producers, it's only natural for rum consumers to expect the types of dubious intentions and even greenwashing that we see across tons of other industries right now. But when you talk to people working in the Caribbean, it's clear that they're facing real challenges and are making real investments to take those challenges on. Sustainability isn't just a buzzword for everyone. For many, it's essential to surviving long term.
I can't help but worry about how climate change is going to impact our category of spirits. Some of our countries are the smallest producers of CO2, right? So like Jamaica is 0.002% of all CO2 emissions. Barbados is like 0.001 or something. But we're highly impacted at a level that other countries aren't by other countries' CO2 emissions. So I think that we're obviously seeing that already. And this is why we've taken such a strong stance on protecting terroirs, especially our own here in Barbados. So I'm thinking this is going to become a bigger and bigger challenge and a bigger discussion point. It'll be interesting to see. I really love classics, right? I'm all about the classics, but I do think there will be an emphasis on pairing sugarcane to your climate change needs. Is it going to be drought resistant? Is it going to be erosion resistant? Is it going to be wind resistant? Who knows what we're going to need? Things are changing fast. So,
speaking of sugarcane, expect more investments in that from producers as well.
I see so much of innovation as getting back to the essential nature, right? So not intervening a lot and not sort of over using the new fandangled finagling technology and stuff. Really keeping it very back to basics, focus on the spirit. But I would say that, and I define technology very broadly, right? So it's but I think that this learning and there's obviously many rum brands that have cultivated their own cane, Worthy Park or super small producers throughout Haiti. But I do think that there's a growing emphasis on this knowledge and this style and this processing of cane connecting to the distillery, which if you think about it, like that is a totally different industry. The sugar and molasses making and cane growing industry is different than the rum industry. So it's kind of like a lot of distilleries expanding into a whole other industry that they're working in. But I do think that stewardship and that connection to the land, it changes your brain as a producer and can really elevate a sensibility there. So I'm excited to see more emphasis there.
Back at EA Scheer, they're already seeing an increased appetite for sustainability sourced products from their customers. So much so that they've folded it into parts of their product development process.
We have this tool which we use, this blending dimension tool, and it still is the same blending dimension tool. We've added one question, and that's a sustainability question, because more and more you can see interest in sustainable sourcing of rum and more traceability of rum and things like that. So we've added that question because if it is important for aspiring rum barons to be very sustainable, we have options for that. We can sell them fair trade rum or Brunswick certified rum or organic rum, or this type of certified products. We could also show them the distilleries where that rum comes from, and a little more transparency on that effect. So you see a development there where more and more transparency is requested, and we applaud that because we think it's good for a brand to be able to show the liquid that they are selling where it comes from, that it is sustainably produced. And we can even help companies, in reformulating their blends into a more sustainable blend, if for lack of a better word.
To be honest, we could probably keep going. Each of these conversations we had was packed with a ton of insight, and we hope we've been able to do them a bit of justice by sharing some of the highlights with you. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with a dose of optimism for the category, courtesy of Zan Kong.
And I guess, like you, I'm an optimist as well, and I don't think we look at rum consumers as this finite. Oh, there's only 100 rum drinkers, and there's only ever going to be 100 rum drinkers. So now all these other brands are competing for the same attention from this 100. I think the goal and the beauty of rum is because it's such a widely produced, and the profiles within rum are so great. The variants, I think it's an ever expanding global world of consumers to appeal to. If that makes sense. I don't think it's finite. I think, I don't know what comes first, whether people like rum and we start getting more, or we have to really, what I've seen is all of us are really pushing to get our rums out there. But I think, as we're getting out there, there's the variety in rum is going to open it up to such a wider swath of consumers.
All right, everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to the 100th episode of the Rumcast. And you know what? We'd love to know what you thought about this episode format, what your takeaways are, what predictions you have for the next 5 years of rum. So as always, you can email us at host@rumcast.com. That's HOST@rumcast.com. Also, as we noted in the intro, we did 12 full interview. The interviews were shorter than our typical ones, which tend to run for 60 to 90 minutes. Most of these were a half an hour to 45 minutes or so. But we do plan, because we tried to include as much great stuff as we could, but there was a lot of great, interesting stuff we had to cut as well. So we are planning to release some of the full interviews as bonus episodes for our Patreon subscribers, just over the next several months, probably. So I think we're going to do a batch of those pretty soon. But if you want to subscribe and get that extra content, you can go to patreon.com/therumcast. It's patreon.com/therumcast. And you can do all sorts of interesting stuff there. We got bonus episodes, we've got happy hours, we have a Rumcast Discord now where people are talking rum all the time. A lot of cool stuff. But honestly, before we go, John, I know we want to just say thank you to everyone who's listening. As we mentioned earlier, we definitely never, ever, ever would have gotten to episode 100 without having great listeners out there who write in with great questions, who are supportive and comment and like things and share things. And so that always keeps us going. It helps more people find the show. And just, thank you to everyone for listening and contributing to the show over the years. It really means the world to us.
Agreed. And I want to do maybe a quick toast with everyone out there. But before we do that, though, Will, I think, this is definitely a labor of love for the both of us. I know how much work and effort was put in not only to this episode, but all the episodes. I wanted to thank you also, Will, for your commitment and the time spent having to talk to me, probably more than my wife and kids at this point. It's been fun doing it with you, and I look forward to a lot more. But to the important part, as you said, is the people that listen and enjoy this journey with us. Here's a quick dose I hope that you can do wherever you are out there, whatever you're doing right now, other than driving or maybe working at the moment. Yeah, that you'll join me and raise a glass of your favorite rum ever. And to those of you who are with us from the very first episode and have stuck with us until now, to those of you who might have found us somewhere in the middle of this run, but then went back and listened to all the episodes prior until you caught up, to those of you who might have only recently found this podcast but are nonetheless excited to be on your rum journey, or to have found some people in the world who seem to be as geeky about rum as you are, we thank you so much for listening and hope you'll stick around for another 100 episodes. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers, everyone. Beautifully, beautifully said, John. And thank you for all that you've put into the show, for bringing your signature wit and humor, the author of the Rumcast Rapid Fire segments, which everyone always wants to hear. The guests get excited about doing something I never, ever, ever would have had the courage to do in a million years. So you always keep that coming. And you're holding it down. So thank you.
I'm just excited for the Hookinga cut of this episode. Release the Hookinga cut. Release it.
The 4.5-hour version?
Yes, the 4.5. People want it, Will. People want it. All right. Well, cheers to everyone, and thank you again. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.